Assalamu alaikum, dear educators and parents. Welcome to today's webinar featuring the Health and Wellness Level 6 with Dr. Amber Khan. Dr. Amber has dedicated the last 2 decades of her life to sharing her expertise in both medicine and Islamic teachings, aiming to assist the youth in navigating various aspects of health, whether it be physical, social, mental, reproductive, or sexual. Her efforts have impacted countless lives, mashallah, and she continues to educate and empower communities in schools across the US. Dr. Khan has also chaired the Education Committee for the Islamic Medical Association of North America since 2015, showing her dedication to enhancing healthcare within the Muslim community. We're both honored and privileged to be working with her on this noble cause. Jazakallah kul khair. And without further ado, inshallah, she will be sharing with us her uh, extreme knowledge and experience in these critical issues nowadays for our youth. Jazakumullah kul khair, Dr. Amber. Thank you so much for giving us your time and joining us in this webinar. And I hope everyone will find it both enlightening and helpful, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and good morning. Jazakallah khair firstly to the Noor Art team for all of your guidance and assistance in creating these webinars. As Brother Sharif mentioned, I'm Sister Amber and I've written a health book series called Health and Wellness from the Islamic Perspective. It includes 6 levels. The first 3 levels, they focus on various topics for our age 11 and up audience on social health topics, physical health, healthy eating and exercise, the topic of puberty and self-esteem. And then we have the levels 4, 5, and 6, which are longer, more detailed, and go into more heavier and mature topics for our older youth age audience. We have, alhamdulillah, completed a webinar for every single level. So if this is your first time tuning in, please check out noorart.com to look at all of the past recorded webinars. And today we are going to be completing the series, and we will be discussing everything that's inside of level 6. As mentioned in previous webinars, all of the levels include an introductory section for our students, for the youth, on the topic of haya and approaching this topic of health and how to navigate some of the sensitive topics that are covered in the series. If you would like to learn more information on the intro section, I do go into detail in levels 1 and 2 in those webinars. So please check that out if you'd like more information. We're going to go ahead and get started and take a look at level 6. Now, level 6, it includes chapters that fall under the unit called sexual health. For level 5, we discussed topics of sexual health, and they really looked at issues of sexuality, sexual desire. We talked about same-sex attraction and the Islamic ruling of that. We talked about sexual violence and a couple of other topics that fall under sexual health. Level 6 continues that conversation, but it now moves into more of sexual health under the realm of family life. And so there are 3 major chapters that are in this level. 1 on marriage, chapter 2 is on pregnancy, and chapter 3 is on contraception and abortion. So let's go ahead and take a look firstly at what is in chapter 1, which is marriage. This is a brief overview and outline of what is included in this chapter. The chapter of marriage includes 3 sections. Section 1 is on seeking a spouse, Section 2, fiqh of marriage, and Section 3, marital conflict. Now, what's very unique about level 6 is that level 6 serves to prepare our young students, perhaps those in the upper level of high school, they're going to be moving on to college, and this helps to prepare them for the next steps in their life. One of the best ways of getting into in the process of marriage in particular is to learn about it before one actually gets married. So having premarital counseling, having an understanding of how to seek a spouse. This also is one of the most common or highly requested topics that youth will like to ask. And this is typically high school age youth. So this is a topic that's really very much on their minds. There are some parents who may think, well, they really don't need this type of topic or even this entire level until they're older. But research has found that when you can better prepare those before marriage, they're more likely to have a successful marriage, more likely to find a partner that suits them and who they are looking for. And they're able to tackle some of those questions when interacting with potential suitors. So this whole series serves as a means of preparing. And this is all a part of one of the main principles and goals of the Health and Wellness Education series is that it is to serve as a preventative health education for our youth. It is not to be a reactive series of if youth are engaging in alcohol or drug use, how do we navigate? It's actually to address those issues so that when they do find themselves in particular situations, they know how to handle them, especially when they hit that college era. So that's what this level serves to do, and specifically the topic on marriage. This chapter, it opens up with talking to our youth about one of the greatest blessings in life is being able to share it with another person. Experiencing intimate companionship with a spouse, it's a pleasure that cannot occur in any other relationship. It's a very unique relationship. Marriage, it has the potential to also help you see past yourself, your own needs, your own desires, and also to think of others. It has the potential to make you learn and grow about yourself, to protect you from haram, to inshallah raise children by the will of Allah. And it's for these reasons and more that marriage, as the Prophet ﷺ says, it completes half of your deen. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said that whoever Allah provides with a righteous wife, Allah has assisted him in half of his religion. Let him fear Allah regarding the second half. So this is firstly to reassure our youth that if this is a desire that you have and this is something that's on your mind, alhamdulillah, that's a blessing from Allah. It's something in which you are yearning and seeking to have. And this chapter addresses if you're ready to take that step. It also addresses a very common social and political norm in today's time, where youth are being bombarded with the idea of being an independent person or with the idea that one can cohabit or one can date. But this gives the other viewpoint from the Islamic perspective on how when you come together as an intimate partner for the sake of Allah and within the rulings of Allah, that this is what can actually truly nurture and making that relationship, inshallah, successful. So then we move on into section 1, which is about seeking a spouse. There are many topics that are covered under section 1. The first one being is that when it comes to marriage, before you ask yourself, what should I look for in a spouse? Really, the first thing you should be asking yourself is, am I even ready to be a spouse? This really puts you at the center of, am I able to give what needs to be given in a relationship? So this talks about some different areas to determine if you are ready for seeking a spouse. And if one is not, how can one inshallah, make improvements and take the time to develop themselves, one of which is looking into one's self-esteem. Now, we spoke about self-esteem in depth in level 3, and we're revisiting this topic here at a very different angle. Now we're talking about it with the realm of marriage. When one has high self-esteem, you are more likely to find someone, inshallah, as a partner that won't compromise your principles. In addition, if you end up with someone that is not good for you or harms you, with high self-esteem, you maybe be better equipped to recognize those signs and seek help. And the reverse is also true, that loving yourself, it makes you more self-aware of how you are to treat other people. You're more likely to have empathy and care for your future spouse. On the other hand, being engulfed with critical and insulting inner thoughts, lacking confidence, constantly caring what other people think, these are all signs of low self-esteem. And if you struggle with that, if a person with low self-esteem may not be striving for what's best for them, they may be more likely to succumb to peer pressure, follow the crowd, out of deep desire to feel appreciated and accepted. And ultimately, when it comes to seeking a romantic partner, they may be at a higher risk of seeking someone that takes advantage or controls them. So if you think that you may be struggling with low self-esteem, it's important to prioritize that over anything else. Talk to your parents, a friend, a trusted adult, a mental health professional on reasons for why you may be struggling with low self-esteem and some tips tailored directly for you on how you can improve it. There are activities that are included in this section, one of which is encouraging our youth to actually take a self-esteem quiz for them to determine where their self-esteem lies at. Another area that looks at, if one is ready for marriage is for you to have an understanding of your own strengths and weaknesses. Qualities that you want in a spouse, they should be those that you strive for as well, that you have as well. So if you aspire to have a future spouse that is trustworthy, that is good with money, that is fair-minded, that is emotionally stable, that has good anger control, well, that also applies to you. A happy marriage involves not only finding the right spouse for you, but you being, inshallah, the best person for your spouse as well. So taking the time to learn about yourself, what are your likes, what are your dislikes, how do you handle conflict, how do you deal with finances, can give you a better understanding if you are fit for marriage. And there's an activity here that asks our youth to talk to someone who you value their opinion. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a youth director, an imam, perhaps it's a friend, and ask them, what are 5 qualities that you really like about me? And what are 5 qualities that you think I need to work on? This gives an opportunity to get you to know yourself, as usually it's the people around us that know us better than we know ourselves. And it allows you to receive some constructive criticism so that way you know where you need to improve. And then finally, the last factor that's talked about in this section, but there's many things that we can look at, but the third one is your relationship with Allah. How is your relationship with Allah? A common misconception about marriage is that marriage is going to make you a better Muslim. Now, alhamdulillah, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, it does complete half your deen, but it requires the effort and the work on both. So if you need to improve your ibadah now, your worship now, praying consistently on time, avoiding pornography, behaving with modesty, and thinking that, well, if I get married, that's just going to solve all my problems. Getting married is not the solution. You cannot put your deen in the hands of another person. That is incumbent on you. That is that individual accountability. Therefore, use this time now when you are not married to improve your personal relationship with Allah. Increase your knowledge in Tawheed, face any doubts or uncertainties you have in your faith, seek forgiveness in things that you did in your past, make an effort to avoid them now. And when you feel self-motivated to practice Islam out of the hope and the fear of Allah, inshallah, you're better equipped to seek marriage for Allah's sake as a form of ibadah. As Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal is reported to have said, that if you desire Allah to be persistent in granting you the thing you love, then be persistent in doing the things that He loves. So these are just a couple examples on how you can determine if you are ready for marriage. Once you feel personally ready, it's the right time, it's the right place, then is to ask yourself, what should I look for in a spouse? Now, Rasulullah alayhi salam, he gave the following advice where he said that if he whom you appeal his character and religion came to propose for marriage, so let him marry. So when someone with whose religion and character you are satisfied, ask your daughter in marriage, accede to his request. If you do not do so, there will be temptation in the earth and extensive corruption. So essentially this hadith, and this is in At-Tirmidhi, it mentions 2 qualities that we are to focus on when looking for a spouse, and that is character and religion. Now, what does character mean? The Prophet ﷺ, he would ask Allah often for good character. There's a hadith in which he says, alayhi salam, that, "Oh Allah, you have made my creation perfect, so make my moral characteristics also to be the best." This is to focus on how outer beauty fades, but our inner beauty, this is what stays with you your whole life. Now, how can you tell if somebody has good character? There's the following hadith in which Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he reports that a man said, "O Messenger of Allah, a woman prays in the night, she fasts in the day, does many deeds, gives charity, yet she harms her neighbor with her tongue." The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "There is no good in her. She is among the people of hellfire." Then the man said, "O Messenger of Allah, another woman prays the obligatory prayers. She gives bits of food in charity, and she doesn't harm anyone." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "She is among the people of paradise." Now, in the first part of this hadith, the first woman's religion, it looked beautiful on the outside, but it didn't really enter her heart, right? Her character was still negatively impacted, or was still something which was tarnished. In contrast, the second woman's Islam and character, both of which were sound. Her Islam had entered her heart, it impacted her actions and her dealing with the people. Therefore, you can't just rely on the fact that a potential suitor prays and fasts, right? That appears like a good Muslim, right? In terms of his acts of worship or her acts of worship. It really doesn't tell you much or anything at all about their character and what they're like behind closed doors. It's only when you interact with them, you watch their mannerisms, you hear about them from your own family and friends, that's when you really get to know someone's character. One of the most reliable ways of seeking a spouse and determining their character is through recommendations from those whom you trust and who can really vouch for that person's character. Now, what about religion? Now, as we know, living in a non-Muslim dominant society, living in a secular society, a person does not have to be a practicing Muslim or even Muslim at all to have good character. This is something we know living amongst non-Muslims, just as the Prophet ﷺ did in Mecca. We witness good character in our daily interactions with non-Muslims all the time. They're your neighbors, they're your friends, they may be people you go to school with, and in the future, people you work with, you trust them, you care for them. Now, when it comes, however, to seeking a spouse, good character, albeit is important, it's not enough. You also are to seek a person with good character and committed to the faith of Islam. This means that they don't just identify as being Muslim, but they are committed to righteousness and obedience. As Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, he reported to have said that the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever Allah provides with a righteous wife, let him fear, Allah has assisted him in half of his religion, let him fear Allah regarding his second half. In other words, that while you are to rely on yourselves to live a life of obedience of Allah, this hadith, it shows us that your spouse has the greatest influence on really making that happen. Their character traits, their qualities, their mannerisms, their behaviors, they become yours. You become almost very similar in nature. Marrying somebody who is a practicing Muslim, a seeker of knowledge, they have the ability to really motivate you to be better, to pick you up when your iman is low, to handle conflicts, finances, family issues under the obedience of Allah, inshallah. Now, this section also has an activity that addresses interfaith marriages. This is a very common question that youth will ask, as they are typically surrounded by a lot of non-Muslim peers and may develop feelings towards them. And so for many of them, they ask, well, what is the Islamic ruling on interfaith marriages? So this activity goes into, firstly, what those rulings are when it comes to a polytheist. This is something that is prohibited for both Muslim men and women. When it comes to marriage of the people of the book, such as the Christians and the Jews, this differs for Muslim men and women. And this section does include Quranic evidence behind that, and that Muslim men are allowed to marry women who are people of the book with conditions, as mentioned in the Quran, of which are the characteristics or the conditions that she is devout in her own faith, in belief and action, that she is a woman of chastity. She agrees that the children from that marriage be raised under Islam. And then there are some opinions amongst the scholars about that she lives in a Muslim majority countries. That is something with scholars disagree on. But it discusses some of the conditions surrounding interfaith marriages. And then it goes into some questions that youth can ponder about. And just to keep in mind, all of the activities do include answers that will be included in the teacher's manual. We are finishing up the teacher's manual. It will be a free digital copy on the Noor Art website, and it will include explanations on the book series. It will include the chapter outlines. It will also include pacing guides. And of course, it will also include the answers to these activities, as well as more activities so that teachers can do some more discussions and just some critical thinking skills in the classroom. But this section will ask youth to kind of ponder over what issues could arise when a Muslim man marries a woman outside of her faith. What is the wisdom behind the prohibition of Muslim women, marrying non-Muslim men? And a third question to ponder is it permissible for a Muslim to marry a non-Muslim because they have just good character? So this is kind of honing in on the importance of that Islam as well. Then this looks at, outside of that hadith about character in Islam, what about other qualities? While character and religion are to be the basis of the decision, there are other qualities that we are allowed to consider. That the following hadith here, it mentions that people marry for many different reasons, some for beauty, for money, for status, for lineage, but these are not necessarily the qualities for a long-lasting marriage, right? So while these can be factors, right, they are not to be the basis. So for example, if someone says, okay, well, I found someone, they have good Islam, they have, they're strong in their deen, they have a really good character, but I'm not attracted to them. Mughira bin Shu'bah, he wanted to marry a woman. The Prophet ﷺ said to him, go and look at her, for that is more likely to create love between you. And so he did that, and he married her, and he mentioned how he got along with her. This hadith shows that even though physical attraction isn't the basis of a marriage, it is still a factor to consider, right? It can be a part of the success of a marriage for some people over others. There's an example about the story of Julaybib, radiallahu anhu, who the Prophet ﷺ, he went to a Sahabi with a beautiful daughter, and he asked the Sahabi's daughter's hand in marriage. The Sahabi was so excited at first, thinking that he was marrying his daughter off to the Rasulullah ﷺ. But when the Prophet ﷺ clarified that he was asking for her on behalf of Julaybib, Julaybib was described as not very good looking. And the father paused in hesitation and asked to go back and, to her mother. And the mother made the same reaction. They became, hesitant. Their daughter overheard this conversation, and she refused to reject the proposal and an order from the Prophet ﷺ, right? Saying that she insisted on accepting Julaybib as the Prophet ﷺ is recommending him for me. And she did end up marrying him. And so we see how for some people that factor may be something that could really impact them negatively in the marriage, whereas for others, it doesn't. So it just varies, but it's important to consider it when seeking a spouse. Another factor is when it comes to unsatisfactory finances. I found someone with good character, with good religion, but I'm not really pleased with their work or with their finances. Now, when it comes to marriage, financial maintenance is a spousal responsibility on the husband to the wife. And without it, one really is advised to wait to marry. As Allah says, let not those who cannot afford to marry keep themselves chaste until God grants them sufficiency out of his bounty. And as of course, the well-known hadith of the Prophet ﷺ said that young men among those who can support a wife should get married. It restrains the eye and preserves one's immorality. And of course, for those who can't, that they should fast. So there is a box that's included in this section about our young male youth who, as they get older and they may still be finishing up their education or looking to find a job or saving up their finances. As when it comes to having a career, it does take a couple of years until you really see that money come in. That, I'm struggling with chastity and people don't want to marry me because of my financial situation, that there's some wonderful advice, inshallah, that's included in this box here to address that issue. And then the last factor is if you find someone with good Islam and good character, but they're not from the same culture as your family or the same ethnicity as your family. Now, while there's nothing wrong with wanting to marry somebody from a certain country or ethnic background, we should be careful sometimes about being too exclusive, especially when it comes to passing up on good suitors because they're not the same ethnicity as you. Culture can be a factor, but it should not be the basis of our decision. There is an activity as well that talks about how prioritizing race and ethnicity when seeking a spouse over character and religion, how that doesn't just impact that person seeking a spouse that is a good person for them, but how that can really impact the entire Muslim community. So there's some questions that are mentioned here to help our youth kind of ponder and think that over, especially when it comes to, maybe the youth doesn't have an issue with it, but maybe their parents do, and how to navigate those types of questions. Moving on is then the process of the Islamic courtship. So what are the guidelines? So this goes into that the woman's wali, that her father, her male guardian must be informed, that they have the permissibility to look at each other, as the Prophet ﷺ, as I mentioned previously, that we are to determine attraction in that way. We are typically to lower our gaze in the presence of non-mahram. But when it comes to this purpose, we have the allowance to look at each other. Typically in a non-mahram conversation, it is to be purposeful and it should be for a need. But when it comes to Islamic courtship, that ruling also softens, and we have the allowance to converse, get to know each other, determine compatibility, ask each other about their life goals, their hobbies, their interests, ask them about important questions like, well, what are your views on having children, or, as means of being able to determine, if you match up. There's a great book recommendation that's also included in this section. It's called Before You Tie the Knot. And in this book, it includes a list of 100 questions to consider asking somebody. And so if youth kind of don't know where to start or what questions to focus in on, this is a great resource that they can use. Other things to think about when it comes to the conversation is, are there any off-limit questions? Is there any questions that you think Islamically are impermissible to ask? So this kind of asks our youth to kind of ponder that. And one of the answers to this question is when you think about asking somebody about their past sins, that our sins are between us and Allah. If we've moved on, there's no repercussions from them in our current situation, then it's no one's business to ask about those types of questions. In fact, it's impermissible to do so. And then the fourth is that you are not to be alone. This is not a ruling that gets softened, that we are to, whether we sit with each other in the woman's guardian present or in her home, you still have can have the space to have a conversation and not people kind of staring and listening in, but you should not be alone. And that includes even digitally. There's an activity here that kind of addresses why that is. This may be a question that some youth will struggle with. And so just kind of have them think about it on a deeper level on what is Allah protecting us from and what could potentially happen, if we try to, work around this ruling. This section also does include a box on seeking a spouse online. This is becoming more and more common in today's time. We definitely live in a digital world. While meeting somebody in real life, many people do prefer that. Most people are finding their match online. So what used to be looked at as something people didn't do is becoming quite common. And the research has found that couples are now finding their spouse through an app, and it has doubled in the last decade, that 1 in 5 couples in today's time are finding their match online, and this is no different for Muslims. So this box kind of goes into some tips and some advice on how to do so. Of course, again, having the wali involved on the woman's side, investing time creating a profile, avoiding words that are subjective, use the site to meet somebody, but actually make real life interactions the goal. Don't just have this, interaction solely digitally. Also is that the options online are so overwhelming. So the internet really gives you quantity, doesn't give you quality. So if you feel like you're struggling with online resources or online, finding a spouse online, take your time, remain hopeful in that manner, give people a chance. Sometimes people tend to be better communicators in person rather than on paper. And of course, there is no point on signing up to an online seeking a spouse, app if you are not in the position to get married. So if somebody is in high school, they don't see themselves getting married for years or what have you, and they're not really in that position, that they want to be very careful of the potential fitna in their personal life that can result from a long engagement or, talking to somebody for a long period of time. And as mentioned, the guardian does need to be involved in that process as well. The last part of section 1 goes into if one gets to the point where they really have felt like they found somebody, that they are to consider, it being a very big decision, to turn to Allah for knowing the guidance on a future situation. So first is to consult with your family, consult with your friends, those who may know this person, is a way of being able to know, is this really someone that's good for me? And of course, is making istikhara. This section goes into a lot of detail on what istikhara is and how to do it, which I won't go into today, but this section does include that as well. So the second section goes into the fiqh of marriage. It talks about the marital process, about the engagement, that the couple agrees to marry, that this is something they've decided on their own, in the sense of that there are not any internal pressures from family to accept a marriage that they truly don't want. The second is making sure the conditions before the marital contract, that both the bride and the groom approve. There's no preventing factors. Of course, the woman's wali approves. The wali is a necessary part of the marriage, according to a vast majority of scholars, the wali being the father or a male guardian. And the wali is someone who is to be Muslim. If a female is a convert, then she can appoint her imam from her local masjid, or she can assign, and he can assign a wali for her on that behalf. And when it comes to the part that the wali plays, is, as Allah says in Surah Nur, verse 32, is to get the single females of your relatives married amongst you. That is a responsibility of the wali, and that both the woman and the father must agree to the marriage. If she does not agree to the marriage, then the marriage doesn't take place. If he, the father, does not agree to the marriage, he too can exercise his position to refuse the marriage for a legitimate reason. If she doesn't agree with his viewpoint on it, and perhaps he's preventing the marriage for reasons that do not fall under, what is Islamically appropriate. Perhaps it's, because the suitor is of a certain ethnicity, or the suitor has a certain type of job, or what have you, then she can consult her family and she can consult the imam, so that way there can be a more appropriate discussion. And there is an activity box on, injustice in those types of scenarios. But ultimately, one is to understand that that is something that is allowed of the wali, as long as it is legitimate and for just grounds. He should not, take his position, as a position of power over his daughter. Next is the marital contract. This goes into the nikah contract, that there should be at least 2 witnesses, a khutbah included in that, an agreed upon meher. There's a discussion on that a meher is something in which the wife decides, but it is of the sunnah that she chooses one that is reasonable and realistic and attainable. As the Prophet ﷺ said, that the best of meher is the simplest or the most affordable. And it goes into some examples of meher during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, such as Sulaym radiallahu anha, and of course Fatima radiallahu anha. The offering and the acceptance is the final part of the nikah. There is a box that talks about, can I stipulate conditions in my nikah? For example, is it permissible for a bride or for a groom to, say there's certain things that I allow or don't allow in the marriage? This is permissible, but there are some exceptions. For example, a condition is permissible, except if it goes against 3 things. Number 1, if the Sharia explicitly prohibits it. So for example, if the husband writes in the contract that I'm only going to marry my wife for a certain amount of time, this is impermissible in Islam. If a condition is that it goes against the marriage contract itself. For example, if the husband says, I stipulate in my contract that we're going to both financially provide in this marriage, we're both going to give in 50-50. One of the rights of the wife is that he financially provides. So this is not a condition he can put in. Another is that one cannot put a condition, cannot make haram what Allah has made halal. So an example, a wife prohibiting polygamy on her husband, she can say, I personally don't want to be in a polygamous relationship. She can say this, but she cannot say, my husband is not allowed to be in a polygamous relationship. A husband cannot write, I do not want my wife to wear hijab or niqab or what have you, that this is something in which he cannot stipulate. Some acceptable conditions can be, of the latter, but everything else is permissible. And then finally is the wedding. It is mustahab, or it's encouraged for us to have a wedding or a celebration. It's a sunnah to serve a meal in that, to invite people to our wedding. The majority of the scholars say that when you are invited, that you should accept that invitation unless you have a legitimate reason not to. And when it comes to the celebration in and of itself, one can engage in, traditional and customary practices as long as they fit within Islamic guidelines. It's also important to protect ourselves from being too extravagant or showing off. The purpose of it is to celebrate the union. Now, also when it comes to the payment, the wedding feast should be organized by the groom and his family, as the Prophet ﷺ, Anas ibn Malik, he said the Prophet ﷺ saw the trace of yellow fragrance on Abdurrahman ibn Auf, and he asked what that was, and he replied, I have married a woman the weight of 5 dirhams weight of gold. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allah, may Allah bless you, hold a wedding feast only, even if it's only a sheep. And from this hadith, we see that this hadith is directed to the groom, meaning the financial obligations fall on him, and he is to provide financially for the wedding. However, If the bride and the groom's family choose to pay for it jointly, there's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to other expenses outside of, especially the wedding feast, like the venue, the decor, outfits, they can mutually agree on that. So there's some leniency there. And then finally, section 2 goes into those rights and responsibilities between spouses. A very important section for our youth to be aware of before they get into marriage, questions that they may want to pose to potential future suitors, so that way they know their own rights and the rights and if their potential suitor is willing to fulfill those rights and hold them accountable. So the section first talks about some of the rights of the wife, such as her financial rights, one of which is meher, as previously discussed. In addition is the financial maintenance. They are to be provided for, food, clothing, home, travel, healthcare, even education. There's many evidence for that as well that this section goes into. And of course is the ethical rights, that a husband does treat his wife with respect and with kindness, as mentioned in several evidence as well. Likewise is the rights of the husband, that he be recognized as qawam, as the protector of the home, and that one of his major, not just it's a responsibility of the husband, but it's a right of his, so that the wife recognizes that's one of his rights, and that she work together with him in order for him to fulfill that accordingly. And of course is his own ethical rights, that she treat him with kindness and respect. And of course, is the rights that both of them have, which is to make sure they consent to the marriage, that intimacy is a matter that is of both of them, good company, that they treat each other well, and that they handle matters, and I believe it's cut off here on the slide, but the fourth one is privacy, that the relationship between a husband and a wife is that if they're dealing with conflict or with other issues in the marriage, that they try and resolve them on their own. Of course, with the exception of harm or abuse, of course, one can seek help outside of the home in those. But for other matters, especially even with intimacy too, is that they maintain that privacy in the home and work cooperatively. Section 3, the final section here, goes into dealing with marital conflict. Marital conflict takes effort from both sides. It involves a lot of patience and energy. There's no such thing as a happily ever after marriage. Even Rasulullah alayhi salam did not live happily ever after marriages. And any conflict or issues that he experienced with his wives are wonderful learning points that we can utilize in our own relationships. So this section goes into some of the details of the marital conflict, focusing on Surah Al-Nisa verses 34 through 35, talking about advising. For the husbands only, if they choose to move to the next step, they could refuse intimacy or kind of take some time to separate from that. They can also move towards divorce if they choose to. The third is that the conflict should never justify being abusive. As Tabari narrated, that Ata said, I asked Ibn Abbas, what is hitting that is ghayr al-mubara or harmless? And he replied that it's with as-siwak, meaning that this served to limit men from doing anything further than a brush or a wipe. An authentic hadith also narrate the Prophet ﷺ, he never hit anyone, he did not abuse anyone, he did not encourage women to marry men who were known to have a history of abuse. Before Islam, husbands had, or men had, no limit to how they would treat women, as women were looked at as second-class citizens in the time of Jahiliyyah. And when you have that type of mentality become Muslim, then they need a multi-step procedure and process on how to navigate dealing with conflict with a woman, especially a wife, instead of impulsively lashing out as one had previously done so. So these steps, they really serve as a protection for Muslim women. They're not to be overstepped and violated. To abuse anyone negates the justice and human rights that Islam promotes. There are some activities as well in talking about how the Prophet Islam treated women and the difference between, why for the husbands, the rulings are a little bit different when it comes to when a woman handles conflict. A woman is to advise, and if the husband does not accept that advice, or conflict continues to arise, then she can bring in a member of her family or a member from his family, and arbitration can come into play so they can kind of resolve it. Arbitration is also what you would call today marital counseling. So this is essentially marital counseling, and consider looking into that if one is dealing with conflict. And for many husbands in today's time, a lot of them, they don't do 2 and 3, or they moved from advice to arbitration as well. And that's perfectly permissible, inshallah, to do so. Of course, divorce is something that may occur. Divorce is permissible in Islam. Some marriages don't work out. Maybe the husband and wife are not compatible. Maybe they argue frequently. And in some situations, divorce can really be a form of healing, allowing a way out. In today's time, however, it's very easy to get divorced living in a secular society. You can simply serve papers. But from an Islamic perspective, divorce is a process. It involves several steps to be taken before the divorce is finalized to ensure that the couple have really exhausted all options before ending the marriage. And of course, when it comes to cases of abuse, that is a different situation of divorce. So we're talking about outside of that scenario. This section does go into the steps of divorce and how one is to navigate through those. But it does highlight some other things, the effects of divorce on children, because we want this section to not just be a means of prep and understanding and increased knowledge for our youth, but we also want to recognize that some of our youth may be coming from homes where their parents are divorced, and we want to acknowledge that as well. Divorce is talked about previously in the self-esteem level, but again, we're revisiting this here for our older age students. This section also opens up with a box, or starts with a box on the stigma of divorce within the Muslim community, and how during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that mindset did not exist, that several Sahaba did go through divorce. Zubair ibn Awam, Asma ibn Abi Bakr, both were very well known for their piety. They just didn't have similar personalities, but neither were looked at as bad people or as failures. And so we need to be mindful of that as well, and nurture the youth whose parents may have divorced, and to not look at that in that way, despite how the community may see that. And then finally, is this section closes off with the topic of marital conflict on domestic abuse. Domestic abuse to inflict harm on a spouse or a partner is something that can occur as a victim can be the husband, it can even be and the wife, it could be of either kinds. There are many different types of abuse which are mentioned here. It is not just physical harm. And as we mentioned previously, the verse that talks about that Allah has prohibited domestic violence, sometimes the verse that a lot of Islamophobes will use to support violence. So there's some resources and reference in here that talk about that. This section also goes into how common domestic abuse actually is, or domestic violence does occur amongst Muslim couples. There's a study that was done by the Peaceful Families Project and Project Sakina. These are both 2 organizations that work with victims of domestic abuse, and mentioned that 31% of American Muslims in their study reported experiencing abuse, but nearly all of them said that the abuse wasn't about religion. It had to do with cultural practice or personality of the person that they were with. It had nothing to do with Surah Al-Nisa, verse 34, at all, that it's not a means of motivation. This section goes into what is one's rights when they are in a situation of abuse, the importance of knowing, protecting oneself. One is knowing your rights, educate yourself on the Islamic understanding of domestic violence that is prohibited, that culture never seems religion, that religion does not need protecting, that for some, if we know a person who is in an abusive situation, family members will say, just stay in that relationship. We don't want you to get divorced. We don't want you to deal with the stigma of it. Or they may say, well, the person that you're claiming is abusing you is a well-known member of our community, and we don't want to expose this person. Allah's religion does not need protection. And some victims fear turning a person into the police, as perpetuating certain stereotypes about Muslim men. But this is something in which we are to protect ourselves. There's also many resources that are shared in this section on how we can help victims of domestic violence, and many resources at the back of the book as well. So this kind of closes off the marriage chapter. I'll move on to pregnancy, but first I want to give you a moment. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them at this time on this chapter.
Jazakumullah khair, Doctor. Please, everyone, you could utilize the Q&A section, or if you actually would like to go ahead and speak to the doctor, that's also available. Inshallah, just raise a hand, inshallah, and we'll give you the mic, inshallah, if you have any questions.
I see a hand raised by Sister Corotolend. If you have access to the mic, you want to go ahead and you can go ahead and speak.
Assalamualaikum. Jazakallah khair for such an informational lecture. My question is that, and what we are experiencing at our school is, especially with the high schoolers, is getting into that, not just having the feeling, but expressing and addressing those feelings, and it's just getting a little difficult for, as an educator, to explain them the difference between, are you ready to be a spouse? It's so if you can just give us some tips, that'll be great. Especially and then we found some of the like instances where, like, two people, they're just showing their affection for each other, and there's a third person too. So it's just, I know it's a high school thing, it's a hormone and everything, and they are in that age, but kind of address that. That is not appropriate. It doesn't matter if it's in a school setting or it's outside. We have to be a practicing Muslim, throughout the day. So if you can address that, that'd be great.
Jazakallah khair for your question. This whole discussion on like premarital dating, premarital relations, even within that capacity of like public displays of affection, or even, having that interest. And this is something which really is heavily covered in that level 5. So inshallah, I would direct you to that section. Level 6 on this chapter, it does address it a little bit. But in terms of navigating those types of discussions in today's time, it's, it's definitely what they see of their greater community, that this is the way that our greater community seeks a partner and seeks a spouse, or what have you, that becomes their model. So as educators, as parents, as community members within our ummah, is we need to create more opportunities for our youth to understand the Islamic narrative of seeking a spouse. Because when we don't have those types of discussions, when we shy away from them, we don't open them up, or we belittle that topic as, oh, they can wait for that topic until, marriage, this kind of draws them closer into the secular perspective of dating and how to express your feelings. And so I think the first thing is that we first need to take responsibility and acknowledge that. The second is, when we do give that advice, is that we also give them advice on, okay, well, what if you're already in this situation? Because we don't want to talk to them as if, every youth in the room is not the same. There are some youth in the room who are dating. There are youth in the room who are talking to people in the middle of the night, or having inappropriate conversations or inappropriate get-togethers. That is the reality. The research shows that is the case, that no one, just because one goes to an Islamic school, they're not immune to that as well. So we also, in that discussion, is we want to share, okay, what tips and advice can I give you if you're in that? And that is actually included in level 5. There's a whole section on, what if I'm already in a relationship now? How do I deal with that? So I would direct you to there. One of the advices is that set your intentions aright. If you realize you're not in an appropriate relationship, then this is something in which you are not in a means to get married, then renew your intentions. If this is a Muslim and someone you still want to marry, but maybe you got carried away with your emotions, then set it aright. Talk to your parents, talk to, their parents, and try and, inshallah, make it more of a, a union and, a Islamic courtship process. But if this is someone who you're dating and you really don't have any intention of marrying them, then you need to cut that off and you need to end that. But that requires you to get to the point mentally of saying, okay, I need to do this. And then the second step is, now how do I do this? But if you're not mentally even there, that this is wrong and I need to stop this, then that's why the discussion needs to be had, inshallah. And we shouldn't shy away from those types of topics. May Allah make it easy for all of us as educators. These are difficult topics to navigate through. There is, in the teacher's manual, going to be a permission slip for educators to share with the parents, so that way the parents know what topics are being discussed, because we also don't want to cross certain parental boundaries in that way. Jazakallah. I'll continue with any questions if you have any more as we move later on. But for now, I will kind of continue on into chapter 2. So chapter 2 goes into the topic of pregnancy. And this chapter talks about a couple different sections here. We've got we've got section 1, which is on the phases of pregnancy, section 2, labor and birth, section 3, pregnancy health, and section 4, fiqh of pregnancy and newborns. This chapter is always included, this topic is always included in a standard health class. So if you go to public school and they offer a health class, learning how a baby is made, how the process of pregnancy and delivery, this is a required class. And so if we want the health curriculum, the Islamic health curriculum, to be vouched as a accredited class, that there are certain topics that need to be included. Of course, this is also just simply an interesting topic. There are so many scientific miracles in the Quran, and many one of the main themes around the scientific miracles of the Quran center around the process of reproduction. So this really can be a means of increasing one's iman when they see how highly connected the whole process of reproduction and pregnancy is discussed in the Quran, subhanAllah. I remember in medical school, in my genetics class, in the introduction of the genetics book, that went into just common the thoughts that people in the past thought how a baby was made. So it went into certain civilizations and societies, and they said this society thought a baby was made this way, and this society thought babies were made this way. Just kind of to see, like, without all of the knowledge that we have in today's time, what people in the past used to think. And it even went into some religions. And it said, well, in Christianity, it supports the view that a baby is made this way, and it used certain, verses from the Bible. And then subhanAllah, it ended with the Islam, and it talked about some of the verses that talk about how a baby is made. And it ended with saying that this is the only civilization that is entirely accurate based on present day findings of how a baby is made. And subhanAllah, I mean, and that was a secular resource. So we can do a lot with this type of knowledge, especially with our youth, and they're living in a day and age where, they believe that religion, is at a discourse with science. It absolutely is not. So this is one of those chapters. So this chapter highlights those things a lot for that impression. It goes into the process of fertilization. This was already discussed heavily in level 2, but we do revisit it. There are many boxes that talk about some of the scientific miracles in the Quran, such as embryogenesis and the leech-like clot, on how the attachment occurs. So this section kind of revisits all those. Section 1 also then goes into what to expect in each trimester, that the process of pregnancy involves 9 months, and they're broken up into 3-month increments. You have the first trimester, and some of the developments that occur in this stage, as well as what the baby looks like. And I mentioned some verses in the Quran about this. The second trimester, this is the stage in which the baby's soul will be breathed in. We'll talk more about that in chapter 3. This is when the baby can move. This is also when you'll find out the gender of the baby. There's a box on that. And then the third trimester going into the growth and development of the baby. Of course, some common pregnancy illnesses like gestational diabetes and preeclampsia. And then a video recommendation on how the whole process works. It's a beautiful video, a very modest video as well, that goes into the baby's development and the changes that they go through. There are multiple activity boxes as well to kind of just ensure that the youth understand the process. There's a lot of scientific knowledge that's mentioned here. So we just want to ensure that they followed along appropriately. Section 2 then goes into the labor and the birth, talks about the 2 different forms, vaginal birth, C-section, why one over the other, what are some of the risks, the consequences, what is the process of how it occurs, uterine contractions, the who delivers the baby, the many options that you have. This is the one condition in the hospital where you don't have a disease, that you go to the hospital for something very natural and normal. And typically when you go to a hospital and a baby is born, there will be like a little song or a bell or a chime in the entire hospital. So that way everybody in the hospital knows that a baby was born right now. And it kind of uplifts everyone's spirits in the hospital because it is something that is very, it brings a sense of joy. So it mentions other people can deliver the baby as well, depending on your health. You don't need to go to the hospital unless there's certain situations that require you to do so. But yeah, this section does go into the stages of vaginal birth and the process of labor, the pain of labor, same with C-section. There are a couple of images as well that are included in this section, which are quite modest, but serve to kind of give someone a visual idea of how that process works. There's also a video included as well. Again, alhamdulillah, very modest video, an illustrated depiction of a side view of the process as well on an anatomical view. The third section goes into the health. So the health before a baby comes out, before pregnancy, what can couples do if they want to have a baby, and some health measures that they need to keep in mind, like of course, drug and alcohol use. Of course, we know it's prohibited. That's already been discussed, but we want to reinforce that as we don't know people's personal circumstances. Caffeine, certain medications you want to share with your doctor that you are trying for a baby, and some tips and advice on that. Some vitamins and things like that to take, the process during the pregnancy, the importance of visiting your doctor throughout the pregnancy process, ensuring things are okay, and kind of checking for some of those common diseases that may occur. Also talks about the weight gain and how one can, that weight gain is normal, it's encouraged, and that physicians recommend that pregnant women gain about 25 to 35 pounds throughout the pregnancy, that's completely normal, encouraged. The encouragement to exercise, and of course is the health after the baby. One of the major aspects about the health after the pregnancy is body image. Going through a pregnancy, it's one of the most miraculous changes a human body can experience, as Allah says in chapter 31, verse 14, that his mother carried him through weakness upon weakness. That this section, it emphasizes this is an enormous change that occurred throughout your body. The uterus expands as big as a basketball, and even more for those who are carrying multiple babies. And so our society tends to push and promote the idea that the quicker you lose that weight, as if the better you are. But this is something that's quite dangerous, that for as long as you did carry that baby, it takes about that much time, and if not even longer, because your body's still going through changes. Now it's going through breastfeeding, and that also goes with a lot of changes in the body. And it also, this section is to highlight to our males, to the inshallah future fathers, that these types of expectations, that a woman's body is much more than just, something in which, if you find appealing to look at, that this is a body that can carry a baby, and that provides food for the baby, and that is the priority. And so to body shame postpartum bodies, it can really negatively impact the woman in that way. And these are some type of Western mindsets that kind of negate that. There also is a box on the father's role in the pregnancy. We don't want to completely remove men from the discussion, that they play a vital role in the pregnancy, making certain positive changes in the home, actively participating, being at those appointments, being encouraged. And the one section I forgot to mention having to do with the after birth health is the awareness of postpartum depression. About this is something that 10% of women do experience, can do with a lot of the hormonal changes after having a baby. So to be informed about that, and for the husband to be informed as well, to pick up the warning signs, some advice on that, and that it's okay to ask for help and to have family help. There is an activity as well on your birth story. Have you ever wondered about your birth story? Ask your parents, talk to them about, how you were born, what the pregnancy was like, what was the delivery like. Kind of gives you a great appreciation for your parents and for your mother, gives you an idea of, just kind of what to expect. It's a very, kind of mature conversation that you can revisit with your parents, and inshallah, they love to talk about it as well. The final section goes into the fiqh. So this is broken up into different parts. First, it talks about how the word for uterus, it comes from, it's a Greek word, or the Greek word, which means hysteria. That the word for uterus means, that women are hysterical and emotional, and it's because we have a uterus. But from an Islamic perspective, the word for uterus is rahim, which comes from the word mercy. And it's derived from the mercy of Allah. As the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, Abu Hurairah narrating, that the womb derives its name from the most merciful. Allah said, I will keep good relations with one who keeps good relations with your relatives, and I will sever relations with one who severs relations with your relatives. So this kind of gives us a beautiful reminder that, this is a mercy from Allah to be able to have a child and carry a child, and gives us a depiction on, just a secular society, and how that depiction or how that understanding of uterus is very different. Then we move into the fiqh. There's the fiqh during the pregnancy, such as the process of finding a doctor, if your doctor is a male or a female, and is that important? Does that matter? What matters most is the health of the mother, and making sure she's comfortable and her aura, of course, but if she's going through certain type of medical illnesses and it's a male, what is the process about that? Preparing for the baby, such as certain duas that one can say, such as when the dua that the Zachariah would say when he was asking Allah for Yahya, for Prophet Yahya, grant me a good offspring, you are the hero of supplication. Some of the bid'ah that's surrounded by the preparing for a baby that's very common in cultures that does not have evidence in the Quran is also mentioned, such as a lot surrounding Surah Yasin. Using this as a time to learn about child rearing, certain books and documentaries and things that, or prep classes that one can take to learn about caring for a baby. And there's some resources that are mentioned, one of which is a 2018 book by Dr. Hisham Al-Audi called Children Around the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the accompanied audio series for that. So for someone to look into and help them learn about child rearing in accordance to the Sunnah, Salah, and the allowance of, changing positions if you're uncomfortable. Of course, the ruling of fasting as well, that one does not have to fast if they are pregnant and breastfeeding, and the ruling about making those up. Finding out the gender of the baby is appreciating irrespective of the gender, and knowing that, the child is a blessing of Allah and that one would take care of that child, in the best way that they can, irrespective of if it is a boy or a girl. There is a section on female infanticide that still does occur in today's time through sex-selective abortion in certain countries like India and China. And this is a Jahiliyyah practice. Pregnancy celebrations on the encouragement to celebrate after the baby is, everything is by the qadr of Allah, up until, when the baby is born, one does not know. And so also is the intention to throw a baby shower because you want gifts is not an appropriate party to have, that we should not have that expectation of guests in the home, that if we're inviting them in a baby shower to celebrate, but the expectation of gifts is something that we need to be careful of, along with other transgressions of limits. Then it goes into the fiqh rulings of once during the birth, like the process of salah and labor, that once the fluid comes out of the female, then that's considered to be impure and she doesn't need to pray. The encouragement to make dua while one is in labor, and that a woman is considered to be shuhada if she passes away in childbirth. Finally is the fiqh rulings with the newborn, saying the adhan in their ear, doing tahniq, or the juice or the saliva after chewing on a date is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and some of the scientific studies behind the increase in blood sugar that can occur is actually very beneficial to our babies as well. The naming process and choosing a name that is something in which are after the righteous or prophets of Allah, or if the name is something that is an important title that you should recognize in your child and choose accordingly. Breastfeeding is the right of the child and goes through some of those details. But it does go into some information about, well, what if I cannot breastfeed, or what if I want to supplement with bottle feeding, goes into some of that. The aqiqah, the process of the aqiqah, and the steps that are required in that, circumcision for males, and postnatal bleeding. Postnatal bleeding, it can take several weeks. It could be about even up to 40 days, and that one is not to pray, nor of course needs to make up that prayer as well. When it comes to the, also the last thing about the afterbirth is if one experiences a miscarriage. Pregnancy, like all occurrences in life, it is by the will of Allah. And if a woman has a miscarriage, first is just the logistics of bleeding is going to occur. And of course, that is something in which she does not need to pray during that time. If the miscarriage occurred after 4 months of pregnancy, we consider that baby was given its soul. The baby should be named and shrouded and given a janazah. These are very unique aspects in Islam. They are not found in other faiths. And this really does provide a means of closure and validation for those grieving parents, alhamdulillah. This section also addresses some medical options if a couple is struggling with conception or struggling to conceive. that we can make dua, that we can adopt or be a foster. We can look into some medical options such as IVF or in vitro fertilization, and the major ruling on that. There are differences of opinion, but one of the major rulings of that is that if it is from the sperm of the father and the egg of the mother, and they are implanted into the mother and not a surrogate, and the sperm is not coming from outside, then this is permissible to do so. Of course, is also to trust the decree of Allah, right? Couples may feel that infertility is a deficiency in their being, or it's a punishment from Allah. So this just simply addresses that Allah tests us all in different ways, and to have that tawakkul and trust in Allah. And there's some resources that are shared as well. Finally is the section on avoid asking what does not concern you. That if you know a couple that's been married for some time and they don't have children, is to mind your own business, to not ask questions. They may be struggling, and so to be have that principled empathy with our family members and our community in that way. And then of course we have our chapter review. Any questions or comments?
Jazakumullah khair, Doctor. Please, anyone, if you have any question, you could write it in the Q&A section, or if you like to raise your hand to address the doctor directly, you're more than welcome to do that, inshallah. Dr. Amber, we do have one question here from Sister Khawla. She's asking, is there a section in the book that talks about a youth who would like to marry a person that is non-Muslim? If you could address this question, please.
Yes, there is a section in the marriage chapter. It's a box that talks about interfaith marriages, goes into the ruling of it, and then it asks questions to the youth on particular situations in that, and the activity answers are mentioned in the teacher's manual. This is a very common question that youth ask, so it absolutely is addressed.
Jazakumullah khair, Doctor. I think we could go ahead. We don't have any other questions.
Okay,
Jazakumullah
sounds
khair.
good. We'll go ahead and move on to our last chapter, and then I'll open it up in case if you have more questions or comments. But the last chapter in level 6 is on contraception and abortion. This, of course, is a question that a lot of youth will ask as well. It's also a big hot topic in our political and social climate, especially within the last few years with Roe versus Wade. And so this became a big hot topic amongst youth. They were very curious on, well, what is the Islamic perspective on abortion? Yaqeen Institute did an incredible series on this topic. They made an infographic, and alhamdulillah, they allowed me to utilize their resources for this section. And so they are heavily cited in here as well. But this section does include, this chapter does include 3 sections. The first section is on, firstly, just understanding the concept of contraception in Islam. Section 2 goes into the different types of contraception, and section 3 is all about the abortion topic. So first, section 1, contraception in Islam. In Islam, contraception is lawful. It is permissible within a marriage. Conception is something, firstly, is a right of each spouse in a marriage, that this is something that conception is only possible in a marriage from an Islamic moral perspective. And many look forward to getting married and starting a family of their own. The Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged us to have children. Marry those who are lawful and fertile, for I will be proud of your great numbers before the other nations. However, in terms of the timing of when we have kids, or perhaps maybe we've gone through certain life circumstances, or we have certain types of personalities, and even though our bodies, inshallah, may be capable of having a child, there are some couples or individuals who are not interested. And this is something in which it's not haram, that It's not required of us all to have children or a certain number of children. It is encouraged, but it's not required. And so for some couples or even individuals, they may choose to delay having children, perhaps because of certain circumstances. Maybe they're still in school, or maybe they want time to enjoy each other as a couple. Maybe they just want life to kind of settle down. Maybe they're dealing with a health issue. Maybe they have kids right now and they prefer to space out their ages. Maybe their marital relationship isn't going very well. They're considering of separating, and, they're worried about, if children come into the picture right now. And these reasons, they all stem from the fact that if a child was conceived in those circumstances, they wouldn't be able to raise that child with the care and the attention, that had these circumstances been given time to pass. So we are considerate of that. And then we also have this scenario where there are some individuals who profess very explicitly, I do not want to have children, despite the fact that they are able to, inshallah, reproduce. And that may be to certain personal traumas or experiences that they had, or personality traits that they know that they are not a qualified person to raise a child. Maybe they struggle with anger control. Maybe they've dealt with abuse in their life and they fear that they may develop those types of habits will come out in their own if they become a parent. Maybe they don't feel equipped. And so because of that, not everyone feels this strong desire, and that is something which is an allowance and something that they have, that a right to say so. Now, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba were permitted to delay parenting through what is referred to as al-azil, or coitus interruptus. This is when the male private part withdraws from the female to prevent sperm from entering the vaginal canal. And this is the way that they practice contraception. As a result of that, and because this was acceptable by the Prophet ﷺ, Islamic jurists have extended this permissibility to modern day contraceptions, but with certain conditions. Firstly, it cannot be used out of fear of poverty. Sustenance we know is only from Allah. That both the husband and the wife agree to using it. We cannot use it privately or behind their back. It's something that, the right of a marriage or of a spouse is to have children. So it needs to be upfront and apparent. The contraceptive should not take away from the enjoyment of the pleasure of the intimacy. The contraceptive must be safe and shouldn't pose any side effects or harm to either spouse. And when it comes to the permanent forms of contraceptive, these are only permissible when it comes to certain health risks, right? So for example, things like removing body parts or what have you, that this is something which can only be done for health risks of that body part or what have you. It shouldn't be to become sterile. So those permanent measures are impermissible. Majority of scholars hold this view that sterilizations, they're only permissible if having children would worsen one's health. And then, of course, is remembering the qadr of Allah, that we can try and prevent things, but if Allah wills, then, and a baby is born, then we take responsibility for that. There is also an activity here that just kind of discusses the concept of qadr and divine will. This is a really important topic that youth, that can be helpful for youth when they're trying to understand the will of Allah. And so I felt like this was a good place to talk about it, because we're talking about the qadr of having a child or not, but it could be extended to many other topics. So this briefly talks about what does qadr of Allah mean? And then it asks a couple of questions for youth to kind of think about. Section 2 then goes into the different types of contraceptions. You have the natural types, such as a woman tracking her ovulation, using the calendar method, measuring her body temperature, examining her cervical mucus as it changes throughout her menstrual cycle. And research has found that abstinence during this time is 100% effective in preventing pregnancy. If you have a regular menstrual cycle, that this is actually quite effective. Another means is using a barrier method like a condom, and with correct use, this is 98% effective. Not everyone can use these. Some have allergies to the materials that like latex, and so one needs to be mindful of that. And just as a side note, important for youth to know is that this is the only contraceptive that also prevents not just pregnancy, but STDs as well. And this was already talked about in level 5, but it's reiterated here. In addition is the hormonal contraceptive. So these are when you take hormones like estrogen and progesterone, we're talking about females here, that stop the body's natural hormones. And so therefore a woman's egg would not be able to be released, or if it is released and a sperm enters, it prevents the egg and the sperm from implanting in the uterus. Research has found these to be 99% effective in preventing pregnancy. This chapter, this section also goes into the details of, well, some females will use hormonal contraceptives, not at all for contraception, but they're using it for other things. This is something that's very common, that some females who struggle with having a regular menstrual cycle, or they're struggling with other hormonal issues, that their doctors will encourage them to take a hormonal contraceptive just simply to regulate their hormones. And so some female youth may be dealing with hormonal contraceptives for other reasons, and this is just to point out and highlight that it has multiple uses. And then finally is the non-hormonal contraceptives, like the use of copper intrauterine devices, that copper changes the way that sperm move, preventing them from combining with the egg. So this goes into a couple of different types of the contraceptives that are on the market in today's time, gives youth some informed knowledge, males and females. This end of this section does go through a brief review. It does address the issue of a lot of these contraceptives tend to mostly be used for females, and why they think that is. Like, why are a lot of contraceptives created only for females than for males? Are there options for males today? And despite that a lot of these are to be used by females, why is it important for men to be informed about learning about contraceptives, learning about the side effects and the risks? So we want to ensure that this is not a woman issue, but this is an issue that couples need to decide and learn about together. There is a discussion as well on the emergency contraceptive pill and how that is also used for birth control. And so there's a whole section on that. And then section 3 goes into the topic of abortion. Islam considers life to be sacred. The first and foremost basic right of a human being is the right to live. Allah mentions this, that take not life, which Allah has made sacred by the way of justice and law. And so Islam values life. And so therefore, to uphold to those principles, Islam has very unique rulings regarding abortion. Islam takes a middle ground, which means that abortion is permissible by a majority of scholars with conditions based on how far along a woman is in her pregnancy and the reason for wanting an abortion. So it's why the abortion is wanted and when, in terms of how far along in the pregnancy. This then discusses the process of pregnancy, that the length of pregnancy and when the soul is essentially breathed in. That in this section, while the egg and the sperm do come together during the development of the human body, it is not conceived with a soul. This is a concept that is believed in certain Christian sects. They believe that when the sperm and the egg come together, that the baby's soul is present as well. This is not an Islamic concept. We believe that human development occurs at conception, but not life in the sense of a soul. And so therefore, the rulings of abortion and the allowance, they vary depending on if the soul is breathed into the body yet or not. And one of the examples that are mentioned here is based on the verse in Surah Al-Mu'minun, which states that then we have placed him as a sperm drop in a firm lodging. This is referring to the zygote. The zygote is when the egg and the sperm come together and enter into the uterus and implant. The next part, then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot, referring to the baby now becoming an embryo. It's now implanted. And then we made a clot into a lump of flesh, and we made from the lump bones, and we covered the bones with flesh. This is talking about the process of embryogenesis. This is actually one of the scientific miracles in the Quran. And then finally, this verse concludes with, and then we developed him into another creation. And this is the part in which we see that this is the point at which the soul could potentially be breathed into the baby. And this is from 40 days to 100 days. It's a phase, it's not an exact day or time, but it's from 40 days to 120 days from the time of conception that the soul has the possibility of entering the baby. So this is the proof that is mentioned. There's also a chart here that kind of spreads it out, that from 0 to 40 days from conception, the baby does not have a soul. From the days of 40 to 120, this is the phase at which the soul will enter the baby. And finally, afterwards, from 120 days up until delivery, the soul is definitely in the baby's body by the will of Allah. And again, there's a couple activities here to reinforce this. Then it goes into the reasons of abortion. So if it's before the ensoulment phase, meaning the woman is pregnant between 0 and 40 days, she just found out she's pregnant. And what are the reasons and the allowance for her to get an abortion if she's in this phase? Some scholars, like the Maliki school of fiqh, they oppose abortion entirely. So there's some scholars that are completely against abortion, of which is the Maliki school of fiqh. And then you have other schools of fiqh that say abortion is permissible. For example, if a woman is raped, she's in 0 to 40 days, she can get an abortion. If the baby is having very severe congenital defects, there's no chance of life, right? And extending it, one can have an abortion. Of course, if a couple decides to carry on with the pregnancy, despite that, that is something which is even encouraged, and it's fine to do so as well. The woman did not intend to get pregnant, and she's unable physically, health-wise. Maybe she has cancer. She's taking, she's on chemotherapy or what have you, and those are very dangerous medications to run through her body. And if she was pregnant, she would have to stop them and what have you. And abortion is not a means to stopping. Is not a means of contraceptive. One should be, if one is in that type of scenario, they should be avoiding getting pregnant to begin with. But again, these are not 100% effective. Contraceptives are not 100% effective. So if she happens to get pregnant, then this could be a means of that as well. And one can even go as further as saying even mental health issues. So this is what some of the classical scholars say. When it comes to contemporary scholars, they highly recommend that if a couple is thinking of abortion, that they seek spiritual counseling. Every case is very different, and so we can't just paint them all with the same brush. And so therefore one should talk to an imam or a spiritual advisor to determine if their particular situation, kind of talk it through in terms of if abortion is a right thing for them. A lot of youth will also ask about, well, what if I get pregnant out of wedlock, premarital relations, and is this something that's permissible for me to abort? Having a baby out of wedlock means, of course, getting pregnant outside of marriage. This, of course, is extremely common in our secular society. We don't know the rates of it within our Muslim community in particular. But sadly, this question is becoming more and more common in today's time. Many Muslim youth are engaging in premarital relations. Some of them do not use contraceptives. Some of them have very little to no health or sex education. They think, oh, you can't get pregnant the first time. They have a lot of fairy tales and myths about the whole process. They don't really understand how it works, but they're engaging in intercourse, and then they find themselves in these situations. Inshallah, they have sought forgiveness for the sinful act that was committed. But despite that, they are now considering abortion as well, right? The baby is proof to others that they committed the sin. They fear the worldly punishment, and they may not be ready to care for this child. They may not want to even marry the person or be with the person. And this is something, again, which needs to be handled case by case. I think what is very scary is we even see reports in the news of Muslim teens attempting to rid the pregnancy, abandon the baby, or even, commit suicide out of fear of this situation. For those who may tell their parents may, harm them, disown them. So it's a very intense predicament. And it shows how pregnancy out of wedlock is one of the reasons why the prohibition of premarital relations serves to really protect and keep you safe. You wouldn't be in this situation if you listened to the ruling, right? But of course, we are human and we do make mistakes. May Allah have mercy on all of us. And so this is something in which classical scholars did not discuss abortion when it came to pregnancy out of wedlock because it wasn't an issue back then. But in today's time, this what was considered a hypothetical question is now very much a lived reality. This requires ijtihad in modern times, talking with a scholar or someone, a spiritual advisor. There is no one answer that applies to this situation, the circumstance. It's not the same for every person. So if a Muslim finds themselves in this predicament, they are to seek the forgiveness of Allah, talk to a trusted adult, a reliable Islamic scholar who can, inshallah, advise them. We're also to be mindful of all Muslims make mistakes. No mistake is greater than the mercy of Allah. And it's also to keep in mind that that child, if they are born from this, is at no fault of their own. A basic principle in Islamic justice is that no one bears the blame for another person. And so that is something which is addressed here. Next is the abortion during the ensoulment phase. So in this phase, scholars disagree even within their own ranks on the rulings of abortion in this phase. Some can still consider rape or health conditions, worsening, despite maybe wanting to try out the pregnancy. And again, contemporary jurists say seeking out a spiritual guide. Sometimes congenital diseases may not arise until this phase of the pregnancy. So there are some discussions about that as well. A lot of youth like to ask about, well, if I marry my cousin, or, am I increasing my chances of genetic defects? Well, if a genetic defect, is a recessive gene in your family line, it's more likely to pop up if you are marrying within your family line. And so to be mindful of that, and to consider, genetic counseling prior to the marriage. If perhaps in your family thalassemia is quite common or what have you, then, you might want to consider that prior to the marriage. And then finally is abortion after the ensoulment phase. This is the phase in which this is the baby. This is a baby that is a human being with rights. All scholars are in consensus that abortion after 100 days, 120 days from conception is only permitted if continuing the pregnancy would endanger the life of the mother. According to the Sharia, potential life should not threaten a stable life. The mother's life, which is certain, it supersedes the baby's life, which is doubtful. And so therefore, abortion is only permissible in those types of scenarios. There also is a section that talks about the religious views of abortion in other faiths, just to have kind of a comparison and contrast between other views, as we see very much in our climate today. And then finally is a section on the abortion practiced in today's time, that this is very much one of the most controversial and divisive issues in American society and culture and in politics, being a pro-lifer, being a pro-choicer, and people wanting to ask, well, are you pro-life? Are you pro-choice? As a Muslim, from an Islamic perspective, we are neither. We are neither pro-life or pro-choice. We have a very middle ground view when it comes to this ruling. It depends on how far along one is in a pregnancy and the reasons for it. But we do not adamantly say, like some other faith groups, that we are against abortion. For those who are pro-life, their religious views are that life begins at conception and that abortion is considered to be murder. But Islamically, this view infringes on our religious freedom, and it impinges on the diverse views on the morality of terminating a pregnancy. That we don't carry the same view. We don't believe that abortion is murder, in that type. We don't view it in that type of way. We also don't believe life begins at conception. So we have some allowances. But we also, when it comes to pro-choice is the view, my body, my choice. That I get to decide, but this is something in which we also don't agree with. We believe that our body is an amana. We also believe that there are certain rulings of, if you're using abortion as a form of contraception, or if you are engaging in premarital relations and not thinking about the responsibility that comes with that, we do not sit on the same ground with you. What about self-control? What about contraceptive use? What about putting morality above desire? So we don't agree on that front either. So we have very different views, on the pro-life and the pro-choice side. Alhamdulillah, we have a very balanced religion. And it's these types of discussions that really pull youth closer to the deen, inshallah, when they are presented in that manner of wisdom, that we have our views and that we give them the tools on how to navigate certain discussions respectfully with things that they see in the social and political climate of their time. And that is the chapter review. So this is the conclusion of everything that is in level 6. Jazakallah khair, and thank you so much for taking your time to listen. I will open it up. I know it's close to 1:30, but I'll take a couple minutes for any questions or comments that you may have. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah khair, Doctor. Thank you so much for sharing with us these details. It's extremely important in these days. We do have a sister Khawla. She does have a question. She's asking about I believe it's called the surrogate, where another person basically carries the child on behalf of the couple who cannot, or for whatever other reason decides to do so. If she's asking if the book talks about it in any of the sections.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Khala, for your question. Yes, this does address it as well in the section on miscarriage, on or someone or a couple who's struggling to conceive. What are some tips and advice for them? There's a discussion on IVF or in vitro fertilization. That is when you take the egg and the sperm from the husband and the wife. As long as the sperm is coming from the male, the husband, and the egg is coming from the wife, and it is getting reimplanted in the wife, this is permissible. But if it is being implanted into a surrogate, or because perhaps the woman's body is unable to maintain the pregnancy, this is impermissible in Islam, according to majority of the scholars. So there is an activity that talks about the impermissibility of surrogacy. And some youth will ask, well, then how come surrogacy is impermissible in Islam, but you're allowed to breastfeed another woman's baby? I love that question, because it shows us that our youth are really thinking about the material, and there's even a box that addresses that as well. So they're trying to find some understanding on certain that Islam allows certain allowances, but it doesn't allow others. It also allows them to think a little bit more deeply about what surrogacy actually means and what pregnancy really entails. That to grow life into a baby is something in which I think as a mother, it's a very unique feeling on when you become connected to your baby the second the baby is in you. Whereas a father, it's different. It's when they see their child. But for a mother, there is a connection and the DNA between the cells between the mother and the baby are shared in that pregnancy. And there are certain hormones like oxytocin that are released between the mother and the child to create that connection. And so when you have a surrogate and the surrogate is to give up that baby and give it to the couple, there's a very unique connection there that is lost, and can even harbor certain types of emotions and feelings between the surrogacy and the baby, and between the baby and the surrogate, which is very different when it comes to pregnancy. That is a baby on the outside, that is not from within. This is a mercy from Allah as a means of being able to nurture and provide for a baby, as that is the only thing that is the form of food for a baby. And so there is an allowance there. Back in those days, they did not have other options. We don't typically look at nursing other babies in our time, with the exception of being like milk families, and we wanting to break those, be mahram together, but it's not necessarily a need. So there's but there is a discussion of surrogacy, and it also extends to a much bigger discussion, a broader discussion.
Jazakumullah khair, doctor. Thank you so much. You see, Sister Khala would like to speak directly to you, inshallah. 1 second. Go ahead, Sister Khawla. The mic is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. So, can you hear me?
Yes, wa alaikum salam.
MashaAllah, you're so intelligent. I love the books that you wrote, and I love all the information that you have written in the book. It's so wise and so informative, especially when I have 3 boys. So it helps me a lot when it comes to the steps of how to go about with my children. So my question is that there's this family, they purposely, the moms are sisters, they purposely fed each other's children their milk. So this way they don't have their children marry each other, or their cousins marry each other. So is that haram, or is that not haram?
Jazakallah khair for your question, and may Allah put much barakah in this knowledge to your family, to your sons as well. Inshallah, it's a guidance for them all. Yeah, when it comes to sharing milk, not for the purpose of providing nutrition, but it's for the purpose of something else. It's for the purpose of, kind of creating mahram, so that the boy and girl cousins are now what people in modern day, they call them milk cousins. We're milk siblings. We're milk brothers and sisters now. We don't have to wear hijab in front of each other, or, I don't have to wear hijab in front of my male cousins. We don't get married. Now, this is, of course, we have a whole legal ruling surrounding our milk relations, or they're considered to be foster. We're fostering, with each other. Is this allowed for this intention? Actually, I don't know. Allah knows best. Please seek out an Islamic scholar who can address if it is permissible for us to nurse for this intention. I don't know, but it is something that's quite common, and a lot of people do it. But when it comes to the Islamic ruling on if it's allowed, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Wa jazak.
Jazakumullah khair, doctor. Thank you so much. It seems we don't. Well, yeah, it seems we don't have any further questions. I would like to thank everyone who attended our webinar. Jazakumullah kul khair. And doctor, it was a pleasure to listen to you and hail from your knowledge. Jazakumullah kul khair. It was, such an enlightening webinar and an extremely important, especially in these days. Jazakumullah kul khair. And thank you all for your questions. And please stay tuned, inshallah, in the future. We will always, inshallah, try to have similar webinars, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair and Ramadan Mubarak, inshallah. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.